30 minutes from Miami sits the Bahamas. Here lie 700 little islands dotted with bankers from old aristocratic families with wildly interesting backgrounds. People here understand the offshore world, and they've seen everything. Do you need a trust? Do you want to buy a bank? Do you need to invest your nest egg? Or do you want to figure out the best way to pass on that $13.5 million to the kids? Well, the professional crowd in the Bahamas is filled with wealth planning experts, structuring geniuses, and tax optimization whiz kids that are standing by to help you. For a price, of course. In this video, we are taking a look at banking in the Bahamas, how you can open a bank account here, and the steps you should follow to choose the right bank from the beginning. But before diving in, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you get alerted every time we post new account opening opportunities. Here at GlobalBanks, we help individuals and businesses unlock the benefits of international banking by helping them find and open accounts with the best banks around the world. And today, we're talking about opening bank accounts in the Bahamas. You come to the Bahamas for banking, wealth management, trust, and corporate structuring. And you stay for the beaches and zero taxes. Just a note, anyone can become a tax resident by investing $500,000 US at Bahamian real estate. Bahamian history in the long list of famous residents is the stuff that movies are made of. The last 60 years read like an action thriller, or John Grisham novel with a little bit of Jason Bourne and The Godfather sprinkled in. In the 1960s, Al Capone's money guy, Meyer Lansky, popped in, befriended some corrupt politicians, and turned the British colony into a mafia cleaning machine. It was the golden age of Caribbean-infused American organized crime. Then, the Swiss banks started rolling in around the 1970s. UBS was first, and by 2018, there was 30 banks. By the 1980s, the Bahamas morphed into a quasi-libertarian male fantasy novel. Sex, drugs, planes, free market banking, and no rules. It became a banking secrecy hub and tax haven for money from North and South America. But then, something happened. The Bahamas cleaned up the banking system, adopted strict banking rules, and started getting serious about compliance. And now, the Bahamas is less known for banking and wealth management, and more commonly referred to as that place where the Kardashians swam with the pigs. But they aren't the only famous visitors. In fact, David Copperfield owns islands and puts on magical treasure hunts for billionaires. In other words, the Bahamas is relatively squeaky clean. Compared to other offshore financial centers that suffered massive reputational damage over the past decade, like Cyprus, Belize, Panama, etc., the Bahamas didn't. It came out relatively unscathed and neutral. Now, let's take a look at why anyone would want to open a bank account in the Bahamas. In a post-Panama Papers world with increasing compliance and stricter rules, banks in small countries are constantly under pressure and at risk of losing correspondent bank relationships. In this environment, some people may wonder, what's the benefit of banking in the Caribbean or the Bahamas anymore? The short answer, backup accounts and diversification. Account freezes and sudden account termination are becoming increasingly common and unpredictable. And they're happening at banks and fintechs everywhere. It's not just in small countries, tax havens, and offshore financial centers anymore. If you rely on only one bank account or have all your bank accounts in one country, you're at risk. If your accounts are suddenly frozen, you're left financially stranded. Your business stops. You can't receive customer payments or pay staff. You're stuck. In this type of environment, you want the safest, sturdiest bank accounts possible. And it makes sense to have backup accounts and keep at least some of your cash outside of your home country, especially if you have a business. But there are other reasons why people might want to bank in the Bahamas. Here are just a few of the reasons that might bring you to open a Nassau bank account. Banks in the Bahamas may be better and safer than your home country. Staff at Bahamian banks tend to be more reliable and competent as well. It's a friendly jurisdiction for non-resident individual accounts at a price. Remote account opening options exist for people from certain backgrounds. Foreign and offshore companies can find account opening options here. And finally, if you want wealth management or trust services, the Bahamas can probably help. Now that we know why some people open accounts in the Bahamas, let's talk about the benefits. Because there are some serious benefits to opening a bank account here. The Bahamas has a well-capitalized banking sector, and the Bahamas has the fourth largest offshore financial sector in the world, behind Singapore, Hong Kong, and the Cayman Islands. Sure, there are some risks with that. The financial sector is 21 times the country's GDP, which can be a good or a bad thing depending on how you look at it. Still, some banks are riskier than others. You need to do your homework before opening an account. That means taking a look at the bank's balance sheet, assessing whether their financials are stable, and to what extent they risk depositor funds. Secondly, they understand international businesses. Being a small island nation, banks here have a long history of dealing with international businesses and offshore finance. They know how to spot bull and can completely vet foreign entities, unlike many of the banks around the world. In fact, one of the only things that scare banks in the Bahamas tends to be Americans. No offense, Americans. They are friendly to non-residents and foreign companies. The major benefit that the Bahamas offers is that certain banks here accept non-residents and foreign companies. You don't always need a fortune to access them. You just need to know which ones to approach. And luckily, you've come to the right place for that. Another major benefit is that many accounts in the Bahamas are remotely opened, meaning you don't have to physically show up at the bank in person. Again, you just need to know which banks will accept remote applications. It's hard to find well-capitalized banks with decent online banking that allows remote opening these days, especially for foreigners and foreign companies. But certain banks in the Bahamas fit the criteria. A quick reminder though, additional documentation is required for remote opening. It can get overwhelming and expensive if you don't know what you're doing. If everything isn't filled out perfectly or you're missing key information, you risk being rejected. And if you paid to acquire, authenticate, and courier documents to the bank, that can mean hundreds in lost expenses. Lastly, compliance and keeping international authorities happy. Being a large offshore financial center, the Bahamas has a lot to lose if they don't follow the rules. If they don't adapt to increasing regulations and compliance standards, they risk being frozen out of the global financial system and losing their correspondent bank relationships. This would devastate the local economy. Banks here realize that the tides are changing. Secrecy is dead, and transparency is the only option. So they seem to be compliant and doing everything that international authorities are telling them to do. Now that we've looked at the benefits of banking in the Bahamas, let's take a look at who should open a bank account in the Bahamas. The Bahamas is like Switzerland light if you're talking about beers. There's a huge focus on private banking, wealth management, trust services, and legacy planning. And there are still a lot of Swiss banks here. In fact, some of the largest banks in the world have branches here, so it wouldn't surprise us if the Bahamas are already on your radar. But non-residents and entrepreneurs, take note. Transactional banking is possible in the Bahamas too, if of course you know which banks will accept you and who to talk to. Plus, it's an interesting option for non-residents, offshore companies, and entrepreneurs with international businesses. There are a few places left in the world that are willing to open accounts remotely for foreign companies, offshore companies, and non-residents without any local ties or economic substance. And some of the banks that we highlight in our GlobalBanks database are willing to do just that. The Bahamas is also a good choice if you desperately need remote account opening, cannot travel elsewhere, have a decent amount of money to deposit, and handle the fees. If you're a GlobalBanks insider and you're interested in opening accounts in the Bahamas, check out the database or contact our team to learn more. For entrepreneurs and foreign companies, the Bahamas can be a good place to have a backup bank account. If your primary business bank account elsewhere is frozen, your business doesn't have to shut down and stop taking payments. You can just use your bank account in the Bahamas as a backup solution until things get resolved. The Bahamas is also a useful option if you're struggling to open accounts elsewhere. Obviously, if you can open accounts at better banks in better jurisdictions with lower fees and less correspondent banking risk, do it. But if you can't, the Bahamas could be worth looking at. While banking in the Bahamas might seem like a great option for you, it's important to be aware of the challenges of account opening here. Opening a bank account in the Bahamas can be overwhelming and expensive if you don't know which banks to target and don't know what you're doing. First, there's too many choices. There are a lot of banks here and they all have different requirements. Some banks in the Bahamas accept non-residents and foreign companies, some don't, others may only accept local residents. Alternatively, certain banks may require you to invest a certain amount of money or buy a trust or corporate entity from them in order to become a client. Before you can apply, you need to figure out which banks will actually accept you and have the services that you want. And while that might not sound so bad, it can be a massive headache and a lot of research. Information can be hard to find, and the banks don't always respond to people who aren't customers, and the process can be very tedious and sometimes time-consuming. Next, rejections. Many people are surprised when a bank rejects them before they even submit an application. Or worse, sometimes they don't even know that they were rejected. Example, we're just not taking on clients at this time. If you say or email the wrong thing in your initial contact with the bank, you can also get rejected. Once you say the wrong thing, there is no going back. You've already flagged yourself as an undesirable client. Next, moving targets. Some banks will have very high deposit requirements. Others accept lower amounts. Some will say they require high amounts when they really don't. Or worse, you never actually find out what they are and end up depositing significantly more cash than what's actually required. So, what should you do? Well, you need to know what the real requirements are, and figuring that out can be a very confusing process. Next, unspoken requirements. Before applying, you need to know if the bank has any hidden requirements, restrictions, or preferences that are not listed publicly. This is common, especially when dealing with smaller banks that have very specific preferences. But the only way to find out what a bank's hidden requirements are is by talking to bankers, bank employees, customers, and applicants who went through the bank's application process themselves. Next, high fees. Some banks in the Bahamas will have painfully high fees. If you're not careful or don't know what to ask beforehand, fees can add up and make your banking experience way more expensive than it has to be. That's why we analyze fee structures and keep tabs on more than 20 different types of bank fees that can severely impact the cost of maintaining an account. Next, paperwork requirements. Some banks will have more challenging paperwork requirements than others. If you choose the wrong bank or don't know what alternatives are possible, things can get very expensive and time-consuming. Just acquiring, authenticating, and mailing certain types of documents can cost over $1,000. Now, I'm sure at this point you might be a little overwhelmed about the challenges of account opening in the Bahamas. And that's exactly why we discuss account opening topics like this in GlobalBanks Insider. If you have just a little guidance, you can save thousands, breeze through the application process, avoid pitfalls, and access much better banks than you otherwise could on your own. So, if you want to open a bank account in the Bahamas and need help figuring out what to do next, get started by using the information that I've shared today in this video. But if you want to know which banks will accept you, the best account opening strategies to use, how to avoid high fees, and even get direct introductions to world-class bankers, you should check out GlobalBanks Insider. With GlobalBanks Insider, you'll get instant access to our entire archive of banking intelligence reports, the GlobalBanks database with more than 250 banks from 50 plus countries, and real-time analyst support to answer your most pressing banking questions. So, if you need help sorting out your banking options in the Bahamas, or just aren't sure where to turn, we can help. And of course, be sure to click subscribe and gain more insights into the banking world by watching our other videos. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.